Chapter 9, Meal Table Ministry. Early in our marriage, Dawn and I developed a close friendship with Rob and Denise, an unmarried couple who'd been living together for several years. They were very aware of our faith in Jesus, and we shared freely about it with them. When the time felt right, we invited them to go to church with us and then join us for lunch at our house afterward. They said they'd love to, but they first needed to check their schedules before getting back with us. 2 weeks passed, and they still had not replied to our invitation. Finally, Denise called us late the night before our scheduled morning at church. She was very apologetic. "Dwight, I'm sorry it's taken us so long to get back with you about going to church. We don't usually respond this slowly when someone asks us to do something, but I need to be honest with you about why we've been struggling with this decision." She explained that Rob had suffered an extremely painful church experience as a teenager and vowed that he'd never return. "I'm sorry, Dwight, we just can't go with you," but she hesitated for a moment and then continued, "We were wondering, could we still come over for lunch after you get home from church?" "Of course," I replied as I assured her that I understood their struggle and how deeply sorry I was about Rob's negative church experience. As we ended our conversation, I said, "We sure do love you guys." "Who was that on the phone at this hour?" Dawn asked as I came to bed. "It was Denise. She finally responded to our invitation." "Really? Are they coming with us to church?" I thought about her question for a moment and replied, "Yes, they are. But they're not coming to the morning service." Dawn gave me a puzzled look. "I don't understand." "Well, they're coming to our house for lunch after the service," I replied. "And if you believe that the church is God's people, then yes, they're coming to church. We're it." The next day, when Rob and Denise joined us for lunch, we delved more into Rob's past church experience. Dawn and I grieved with them as they relived the experience with us. That day, we became the church to Rob and Denise. Our lives became their sermon, and our meal table became their sanctuary. They've come back to church at our meal table numerous times in the years since. And around our table, we've often discussed God, the church, family, work, love, and life purpose. Jesus modeled meal table ministry. Jesus loved spending time with people around meal tables. They were one of his favorite ministry venues. The Gospels record that he ate with, drank with, or fed people many times as a part of his ministry to them. I think it was a very intentional part of his ministry strategy. Here are just a few examples. After spotting Zacchaeus from a distance, Jesus saw the impact of an up-close encounter with this man. He went to his home and sat at his meal table, becoming for him and his sinner friends the bread of life. As Jesus reclined at the meal table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman who had lived a sinful life anointed him with an expensive perfume. Jesus affirmed her actions to those sitting at the table with him and held her up as a model for us to follow. At a wedding feast, Jesus performed his first miracle by turning water into wine. Jesus fed fish and loaves of bread to thousands. While sharing his Last Supper with his disciples, Jesus showed them the full extent of his love by washing their feet. After Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times, Jesus reinstated him over a breakfast of fresh fish and bread near a lakeshore fire. Sharing meal table time together was such a well-known ministry style of Jesus that even after 7 miles of walking and talking together, it wasn't until Jesus sat down at a table and broke bread with them did 2 of his disciples recognize him after the resurrection. As you can see, Jesus ministered to plenty of people around meal tables. It provided the perfect environment for the kind of highly relational, up-close style of ministry that characterized his life. Meal tables played such a significant role in Jesus' relational ministry that he once described himself in terms of food and drink. He said, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking." The Pharisees also described him in terms of food and drink. They described Jesus in Matthew 11:19 as a glutton and a drunkard who hung out with tax collectors and sinners. Although the Pharisees obviously intended to use this description as a criticism, Jesus embraced it as a compliment. It bothered the Pharisees that Jesus spent so much time eating and drinking with people. They thought his time was better spent teaching in the synagogues than hanging out at meal tables and eating with sinners. But the meal table was one of Jesus' favorite ministry spots. And you know what? It still is, even though he's no longer here on earth. Let me explain. In the book of Revelation, Jesus spoke these words to the church in Laodicea. "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him, and he with me." Although in this passage, eating is a metaphor that connects a physical act to a spiritual truth, we can still learn from it. This metaphor shows us that Jesus connects eating with relationship. When we open the door, we enter into a relationship with Jesus. In a sense, we're welcoming him into our lives. In response, he comes in. Rather than stand at the door politely greeting us, he wants to hang out up close at the dinner table with us. That sounds strange. It shouldn't. Jesus did the same thing with Matthew and Zacchaeus after they let him in. He joined them in their homes for dinner and asked them to invite their friends. Jesus eats with us in order to deepen his relationship with us. In a spiritual sense, he does with us what he did with his disciples so many times around a meal table. He relaxes, laughs, enjoys, converses, and lingers with us in deep relationship. That's the power of eating together, whether we're spiritually dining with Jesus or physically gathering around a table with friends. Lingering. Eating together plays such a powerful role because the meal table is the forum where ideas and values are naturally exchanged. No wonder it's been said that some of the world's greatest ideas were written first on table napkins. Where else will people pull up close to each other and linger long enough to share their thoughts and feelings at a deep level? Love expresses itself in natural ways at meal tables. Love shares more deeply at meal tables than almost any other time of the day. Love lingers at meal tables. Unfortunately, many families fail to eat dinner together and lose the advantage of relational bonding that occurs in those special mealtime moments. But it's also the reason why many families do guard their meal times. Some make sure the whole family eats around the table the majority of dinner meals each week. They fiercely guard it as an opportunity to catch up on what's happening in everyone's lives, and they won't allow the TV or other technologies to distract from it. In addition to being a connection place, the meal table is also the setting where family traditions and stories are passed from one generation to the next. Ask people where their family stories were shared, and they'll point to those relaxed meal times, often during holidays when no one was in a hurry to leave the table. And they'll speak with fond memories about the hours they spent laughing and talking. When their time together was over, they left with full stomachs and even fuller hearts. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. You've likely experienced the relational power of these moments as well. But have you ever considered it a place of ministry? You can use meal tables to effectively minister to others in natural, highly relational, and up-close ways, just like Jesus did with Matthew and Zacchaeus, and just like Dawn and I did with Rob and Denise. TV trays and tuna fish sandwiches. Back in my bachelor days, I lived in a small house in a friendly, blue-collar Midwestern neighborhood. One of my favorite neighbors was Thelma, a kind, white-haired widow who struck me as an out-of-place woman in my neighborhood. She was one of the classiest ladies I knew. I enjoyed our fleeting moments of conversation as we ran into each other coming and going, and I wanted to get to know her better. So one day, I invited her over for lunch. Now, there's something you should know about me. I am horrible at making meals. As I prepared for Thelma's visit, I studied my almost bare cupboards and realized that it was either tuna fish or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I chose tuna fish. I couldn't imagine making PB&Js for such a classy lady. I cut the sandwiches in diagonal halves to add a little more class to my meal presentation and served them with some chips and tea. And I settled for dining on TV trays since I had nothing else that would function as a meal table. I whispered a final prayer as the doorbell rang, and soon Thelma was sitting behind a TV tray. And I explained that I'd just returned from a third world country where food was scarce and asked if it was okay with her if I prayed to thank God for our lunch. She politely obliged and followed my lead by bowing her head. And when I finished praying, I said, "Amen," and then looked up at Thelma. But her head was still bowed. I thought maybe she didn't hear me, so I said, "Amen," again. She still kept her head down. Oh no, I thought she's either taking a closer look at my inept culinary skills or she fell asleep during my short prayer. Then I heard a sniffle. That's when I realized she was crying. "Thelma, are you okay?" I stammered. She didn't answer right away, which set off a bit of panic inside me. "Dwight, I'm scared," she said, continuing to look at the floor. I slipped off my chair and knelt beside her. "What are you afraid of?" Thelma finally looked back at me. "A lot of my friends have died recently, and I can't sleep at night because I'm so afraid to die. It's consuming my thoughts day and night." "What scares you most about dying?" She paused as she pondered the question. Dwight, I don't know what's going to happen after I die, and I'm afraid I'll be all alone. Suddenly, the casual environment of our TV tray meal table became a safe sanctuary for further and deeper sharing than we'd ever experienced before. Deep inside, I realized I was Thelma's neighbor for such an hour as this. As I shared and prayed with her, she became more than my neighbor. She became a fellow child of God. She found comfort in knowing that Jesus promised he would never leave her and that we would again be neighbors in heaven someday. God used our meal to deliver her from paralyzing fear. Thelma and I, along with my wife after we were married, became very good friends. Our kids even called her Grandma V. More importantly, Thelma loved and served God until she walked into the safe arms of Jesus in heaven. And what was the turning point in Thelma's life? A mealtime conversation over tuna fish sandwiches. Our family continues to invite our neighbors into our home for meals, and sometimes we invite one neighbor family, other times we invite several at once. Occasionally we organize block parties and invite every family in our neighborhood. Block parties offer an incredible opportunity to connect with people we hardly know in a way that opens the door for further involvement in their lives. Every time we invite people over for a meal, it affirms to me why Jesus did so much of his ministry around meal tables. Another love language. A number of years ago, Gary Chapman wrote a book entitled The 5 Love Languages. In it, he explains there are several different ways people prefer to give and receive love. He lists the 5 love languages as serving, giving gifts, spending quality time with others, sharing words, and touching. I really like his book, but I've jokingly told friends that Chapman may have missed one. I think I've found one more love language common to almost everyone: eating. It may even be the universal love language. I know for sure it's one of mine, and when I share a meal with someone, I connect at deeper levels than almost any other time. Maybe the same is true for you. It may look different for you than it does for others. For some, the meal table might take the appearance of an outdoor cookout or lunch in a restaurant. For others, it may look like a corner table at Starbucks or Barnes & Noble. But more importantly, meal table ministry is something anyone can do. When I speak for various audiences, I often ask them, "How many of you like to eat?" And they laugh a little, and nearly everyone raises a hand. "Well then," I continue, "most of you have great ministry potential." We laugh about it, but they clearly get the point. Sharing a meal carries tremendous power. Is God speaking to you about reaching people in your sphere of influence? Maybe you could meet them for coffee or invite them into your home for a meal. It doesn't have to be formal or fancy. It doesn't require a great deal of preparation. Even TV trays and a couple of tuna fish sandwiches will do.